Vivien Leigh became an icon with Gone with the Wind, but the fame that made her a legend also tore her apart. From the world's biggest stages to lonely hospital rooms, her life was a battle between brilliance and breakdown. Fame gave her everything: Oscars, applause, immortality, but it also took everything she loved. This is a story of survival, heartbreak, and the hidden cost of being unforgettable. Vivien Leigh's story began in a beautiful place, Darjeeling, India. She was born there on November 5, 1913, to British parents. Both of her parents had a strong connection to India, as they were born there too. When Vivien turned 6, her parents made a big decision. They sent her to England for a Catholic education. This started a journey that would take her to different countries and expose her to many cultures. Between 1920 and 1931, Vivien studied in schools all over Europe. She began at the Convent of the Sacred Heart in London, a well-known school that was later destroyed in World War II. Her studies continued in France, first in Dinard, then in Biarritz. After that, she moved to San Remo in Italy and finally to Paris. Along the way, she learned to speak French and Italian fluently. At 18, Vivien returned to England and made an announcement that surprised her parents. She wanted to be an actress. In 1932, she joined the Royal Academy of Dramatic Art in London to follow her dream. But life had other plans. While studying, Vivien met a barrister named Herbert Lee Holman, who was 13 years older than her. They quickly fell in love and got married in December 1932, just a few months after they met. This marriage made her step away from acting for a while. The following year, in October 1933, she gave birth to her only child, a daughter named Suzanne. For a time, Vivien focused on being a wife and mother, but her love for acting never went away. In 1935, Vivien took her first small step back into acting. She appeared as an uncredited extra in the film Things Are Looking Up. Though it was a tiny role, it reminded her of how much she loved performing. That same year, she got her first big break in a play called The Mask of Virtue. This role changed everything for her. The play's director suggested she change the spelling of her name from Vivien to Vivien to avoid confusion. She also adopted her husband's middle name, Leigh, creating the name we all know today, Vivien Leigh. Her performance in The Mask of Virtue was a sensation. Newspapers called her a stunning newcomer and praised her beauty and talent. One critic even said she was the essence of English girlhood. But the sudden fame was overwhelming. Vivien later admitted she felt unprepared for the pressure of being called a great actress so early in her career. On May 20th, 1935, she went to see a play, Romeo and Juliet, in London. As she watched Laurence Olivier perform as Romeo, something about him struck her deeply. She turned to her friend and confidently said, "That's the man I'm going to marry." The statement was bold because both she and Olivier were already married to other people. That night, they met backstage for the first time. It was a short meeting, but it sparked something that would soon grow into a passionate and scandalous affair. Over the next few years, they couldn't seem to stay away from each other. They acted together in the movie Fire Over England and performed on stage in Hamlet. Their chemistry was undeniable, and it wasn't just for the cameras. In 1938, Leigh followed Olivier to Hollywood while he was filming Wuthering Heights. Their closeness became impossible to ignore, raising eyebrows and creating gossip. But this trip to Hollywood wasn't just about their relationship. It brought Vivien Leigh to the opportunity of a lifetime. On December 10, 1938, Olivier's agent, Myron Selznick, introduced her to his brother, David O. Selznick, the producer of Gone with the Wind. Before finalizing Leigh, the search for Scarlett O'Hara had become a massive event in Hollywood. Thousands of actresses were considered, and dozens were screen tested. Vivien knew she had to stand out. She boldly approached David Selznick during the filming of the Atlanta fire scene and introduced herself as Scarlett O'Hara. Even then, she had to prove her worth through tough screen tests and competition from other actresses like Paulette Goddard. Leigh didn't hold back. She even staged a photo shoot dressed as Scarlett and sent the images to Selznick. Her hard work paid off when she was officially cast just weeks before filming began. Playing Scarlett changed everything for Vivien Leigh. The movie was a massive hit, and her performance turned her into a global star. At the premiere in Atlanta in December 1939, over 300,000 people showed up, and all eyes were on her. Offers for new roles poured in, but she was careful about her choices. Between 1940 and 1945, she acted in only 3 movies, including Waterloo Bridge and That Hamilton Woman. Her selective nature made her even more desirable in Hollywood. Vivien's career reached another high point in 1940 when she won the Oscar for Best Actress for her role in Gone with the Wind. At just 26 years old, she became the youngest winner in that category at the time. But this success came at the cost. After Gone with the Wind became a huge success, MGM, her studio, expected her to maintain her star power. When she told them she wanted to return to performing on the British stage, they threatened to ruin her career if she didn't keep making films for them. The studio even interfered with her personal life. In 1943, when Vivien became pregnant with Laurence Olivier's child, MGM pressured her to have an abortion. They worried that having a baby would hurt her glamorous image. Tragically, Vivien miscarried shortly after, and the loss had a devastating effect on her mental health. Fame brought its own set of problems. After Gone with the Wind premiered in December 1939, Vivien became one of the most famous women in the world. At first, the attention might have seemed exciting, but it quickly became overwhelming. She couldn't even walk down the street without being mobbed by fans. The constant loss of privacy started to wear her down. During a live radio interview in early 1940, she had a panic attack and couldn't speak for several minutes. People started to notice something was wrong. By the end of that year, Vivien was having severe mood swings and bouts of depression. In 1944, Vivien Leigh's life took a dramatic turn. She was diagnosed with tuberculosis in her left lung after months of ignoring her health. She had been performing tirelessly for troops in North Africa during the war, pushing through coughing fits and fevers. However, the tuberculosis was only the start of her problems. In 1945, while filming Caesar and Cleopatra, Vivien suffered a miscarriage. The loss devastated her and sent her into a deep depression. It also triggered something darker. Her first major episode of bipolar disorder. She collapsed in tears, crying uncontrollably. It shocked everyone around her, marking the beginning of a long and painful battle with her mental health. That same year, during her performance in The Skin of Our Teeth, her struggles became more public. Vivien's mood swings grew worse. She went from extreme exhaustion to bursts of manic energy. Still, she pushed through every performance until the play ended. Things got worse when she began mixing alcohol with her medication for tuberculosis. One of the drugs, isoniazid, was known to cause mental confusion and even psychosis. Combined with alcohol, it made Vivien's behavior even more unpredictable. Her episodes became more frequent and intense, leaving her loved ones worried and unsure of how to help her. Still, she worked hard on her next film, A Streetcar Named Desire. Leigh poured everything into the role of Blanche Dubois. For months before filming, she lived as Blanche, isolating herself from friends and family, reciting lines late into the night, and even wearing Blanche's clothes in public. She barely ate, surviving on cigarettes and black coffee, losing over 20 pounds. On set, she insisted everyone call her Miss Dubois, even off camera. Her performance was breathtaking. In 1952, Vivien won her second Oscar for playing Blanche, making her one of the few actresses to win two. But playing Blanche took a terrible toll on Vivien's mental health. She had been diagnosed with bipolar disorder years earlier, but Streetcar made things worse. After the movie, she started having manic episodes. One time, she wandered the streets of Los Angeles, thinking she was still Blanche. Moreover, she suffered a miscarriage shortly after the film premiered, which she blamed on the stress of playing Blanche. Her drinking worsened, and she wrote in her diary, "I have given everything to Blanche. She has taken everything from me." As Leigh's mental health worsened in the late 1940s, Olivier found it harder and harder to cope. Things got even worse in 1953, during the filming of Elephant Walk in Sri Lanka. Leigh had a complete breakdown on set. She couldn't continue, and Elizabeth Taylor had to replace her. Olivier flew to Sri Lanka to bring her home. When they returned to England, Leigh was sent to a hospital, where she underwent electroconvulsive therapy, ECT. This harsh treatment was the only option at the time, but it didn't help her. If anything, it made her condition worse. Olivier later said that the cracks in their relationship really showed during their 1948 tour of Australia and New Zealand. The 6-month tour was exhausting, and both of them were under constant pressure. Olivier found it harder and harder to keep things together, both for their work and their marriage. He admitted that this was when he felt he had lost Vivien. Their relationship wasn't just tense in private. It sometimes exploded into shocking public arguments. One of their worst fights happened during the same tour. In New Zealand, Leigh refused to go on stage because her shoes were missing. Olivier, already stressed to the limit, slapped her in front of everyone. Leigh, furious and embarrassed, slapped him right back. Still, minutes later, she pulled herself together, borrowed a pair of shoes, and went on stage smiling like nothing had happened. It was a clear example of how much pressure they were both under to keep up appearances. Another violent incident happened in 1956 after Leigh suffered her third miscarriage. She was furious and out of control, screaming and hitting Olivier with a wet towel. He lost his temper and threw her across the room. She hit her head on a marble table, barely missing her temple. This was a turning point for Olivier. He later admitted he realized then that their fights were so intense they might actually end up hurting or even killing each other. As their marriage fell apart, both of them turned to other people. Leigh began an affair with Australian actor Peter Finch, someone Olivier had introduced to her years earlier. Their relationship went on for years, though it became more difficult as Leigh's mental health got worse. Olivier also had his own affairs. He was involved with Dorothy Tootin in 1953 and later with Claire Bloom while filming Richard III in 1955. But it was Joan Plowright, a younger actress he met in the late 1950s, who changed everything. Their relationship grew serious, even though Plowright was still married at the time. This affair ultimately led to the end of Olivier and Leigh's marriage. On May 19, 1960, he asked her for a divorce. It was the end of their 20-year marriage. Despite the pain, Olivier wrote her a kind letter, thanking her for understanding and acknowledging how difficult it had been for both of them. Later that year, the divorce was finalized, and Olivier married Joan Plowright. Vivien Leigh's life after turning 40 took a hard turn. Out of all the 19 films she made, only 3 happened after this age: The Deep Blue Sea in 1955, The Roman Spring of Mrs. Stone in 1961, and Ship of Fools in 1965. This was a sharp drop, especially for someone who had once been one of the most celebrated actresses in Hollywood, with 2 Academy Awards under her belt. The long gaps between these films were not because she didn't want to work or had lost her talent. Instead, it was the result of her battle with bipolar disorder and the film industry's preference for younger actresses. Her last movie, Ship of Fools, came out when she was 51. It was a powerful performance, earning her critical praise. Despite these struggles in film, Leigh never gave up on performing. She turned to the stage, where she found new success and a fresh sense of purpose. From 1946 to 1960, she appeared in 16 plays, proving her dedication to her craft. Leigh's work on stage wasn't limited to England. She toured around the world, performing in places as far as Australia, New Zealand, and South America. Her tours were grueling, and the physical and emotional toll was heavy, especially as she continued to struggle with her health. But she kept going, driven by her love for the theater. In her 50s, Leigh surprised everyone by stepping into a completely new genre, musical theater. In 1963, she starred in Tovarich on Broadway, playing a Russian duchess trying to adjust to life as a servant. This role required her to sing and dance, skills she hadn't showcased before. Audiences loved her performance, and it earned her a Tony Award for Best Actress in a Musical. This achievement was especially meaningful, coming at a time when her film career had slowed down. It showed that Leigh still had the power to captivate audiences and take on new challenges, even later in life. Her final 2 films carried a deep emotional weight, reflecting both her personal struggles and her feelings about aging. In The Roman Spring of Mrs. Stone, she played an actress who realized her career was over, a role that hit close to home. In Ship of Fools, she portrayed a lonely woman searching for meaning in her life. Both roles felt personal, and her performances were filled with raw emotion. Critics praised her work, and she even won a French award, the Étoile de Cristal, for her role in Ship of Fools. These films were a reminder of her incredible talent, even as her health continued to decline. Vivien Leigh's final years were a mix of love, pain, and quiet moments of happiness. After her stormy marriage to Lawrence Olivier ended, she found comfort with Jack Merivale, an actor who became her partner in 1960. Jack was different from Olivier. He wasn't dramatic or fiery. He was calm and steady, exactly what Vivien needed as she struggled with her mental health and the serious illness, tuberculosis. Jack stayed by her side, always patient, always supportive. Jack loved Vivien deeply. He even took up photography as a hobby to capture their life together. Using her camera, he snapped photos of Vivien smiling, spending time with friends, and relaxing at her peaceful country home, Tickeridge Mill. These pictures showed a side of Vivien that the public rarely saw, happy and at ease. But even as she moved forward with Jack, traces of her past with Olivier stayed with her. In one photo Jack took, Vivien is putting on makeup at her dressing table. There are 3 photos of Olivier sitting there, as if she couldn't quite let go of the man who had been such a big part of her life. Jack understood this and never let it bother him. Jack also promised to take care of Vivien's health. When her tuberculosis got worse in May 1967, he was by her side, helping her through the difficult days. On July 8, 1967, Vivien passed away at home in her London apartment. She was only 53. Jack stayed with her until the end, keeping his promise to care for her. Even though Vivien and Olivier had divorced years earlier, they never lost their connection. They wrote letters to each other, and Olivier's words showed how much he still cared. When their divorce was finalized, he wrote to her, thanking her for being brave and graceful, even though he knew it had been hard for her. Just 5 weeks before she died, Olivier sent another letter. He ended it with, "Sincerest love, darling, your Larry." That simple, loving note showed how deep their bond still was, even after all the years apart. When Olivier found out Vivien had died, he was in the hospital, recovering from surgery. But as soon as he heard the news, he left to visit her apartment. He stood by her body and prayed, asking for forgiveness for everything that had gone wrong between them. It was a final goodbye to the woman who had meant so much to him. Vivien's death shocked the world. She had been so full of life and talent, and it was hard to believe she was gone. London's West End theatres turned off their lights for an hour to honor her, a rare tribute to one of Britain's most beloved stars. A memorial service was held at St. Martin-in-the-Fields, and many famous actors and friends came to say goodbye. As Vivien had wished, her ashes were scattered on the lake at Tickeridge Mill, the place where she had found some of her happiest moments. Vivien's life was full of incredible highs and deep struggles, but her talent and beauty left a mark on the world. Even now, her performances and story continue to inspire people everywhere.